Some campgrounds don't trap you. They don't lock the gates. They don't chase you. They just wait. Wait for you to stay a little too long. Wait for you to hesitate. Wait for you to miss the moment when leaving was still an option. In these stories, nothing forces people to stay. No one is stopped. No one is warned. And that's exactly the problem. Before we begin, comment where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now, because the places you're about to hear about felt safe, familiar, normal, until everyone else knew it was time to leave. And the people who stayed never left the same way again. I arrived later than I meant to. That happens on road trips. You tell yourself you'll stop before dark, then the highway stays empty. The gas stations get farther apart, and suddenly the dashboard clock says something you don't like. The sign for the campground came up out of nowhere. Brown, reflective, ordinary. I remember feeling relieved more than anything else. At the entrance, there was a small booth on the right, lights on inside. No one sitting there. Above it, a whiteboard listed the hours in black lettering. Campground closes at 10 p.m. I checked the clock again, 10:47 p.m. The gate arm was raised. I slowed down, expecting it to drop. It didn't. No warning sound, no flashing light, just open. I told myself they probably forgot to close it, or maybe they left it open for late arrivals. National parks are understaffed. Everyone knows that. It felt reasonable enough to keep going. I pulled up next to the booth. The window was open an inch or two. Inside, a small lamp cast a yellow circle on the counter. There was a clipboard, a stack of envelopes, and one of those old metal cash boxes you see everywhere. No ranger, no note. Next to the window was a laminated sign explaining the after-hours check-in process. Drop your fee in the envelope. Write your site number. Place the stub on your dashboard. Simple. Everything looked normal, too normal to question. I filled out the envelope, slid the cash inside, and dropped it through the slot. The metal clink echoed louder than I expected. It sounded like it traveled somewhere deeper than the box itself. Behind the booth, a large campground map was mounted on a wooden board. Green lines for roads, small squares for campsites, a bold arrow pointing toward exit. I studied it longer than necessary, mostly because I was tired, mostly because I wanted to be sure I wouldn't have to think again once I parked. The place felt empty, not abandoned, just waiting. The kind of quiet you get when everyone else has already settled in for the night. I drove forward, slowly. The tires crunched over gravel. My headlights swept across picnic tables and fire rings. Everything was dark. No campfires, no voices, no movement. A few sites were marked as reserved, but I didn't see a single car. I chose one near the edge, backed in, turned off the engine. For a moment, I sat there with my hands still on the wheel, listening. Nothing but the soft ticking of the cooling engine. I thought about the gate again, about the posted hours, about how the map made everything look so orderly. I remember thinking, maybe they just forgot to close it. I grabbed my bag, stepped out of the car, and shut the door behind me. The sound carried farther than it should have. I didn't set up the tent right away. I stayed in the car longer than I usually would, just sitting there, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. The campground felt bigger than it looked on the map. The road curved gently, but every turn seemed to lead to another stretch of empty sites. Picnic tables, fire rings, identical clearings cut into the trees. I turned the headlights back on and drove slowly. I wanted a site that felt temporary, somewhere I wouldn't feel bad leaving early in the morning. That's when I noticed how quiet it really was. No wind in the trees, no insects, no distant traffic. Just the sound of gravel under my tires. I passed a sign pointing toward the restrooms, another sign listing campsite numbers. Everything was labeled, everything made sense, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I had already driven this exact stretch of road before. I told myself it was fatigue. That happens when you've been on the road all day. I pulled over near another map board. This one was smaller, older. The wood looked weathered. I got out of the car and walked up to it with my phone light on. The map showed the same layout as the one at the entrance. Same roads, same loops, same arrow pointing toward exit. But a few of the campsite numbers were missing. Not crossed out, not marked unavailable, just not there. I stared at it longer than I should have, tried to compare it to the image in my head, tried to remember if those sites had ever existed at all. A chill crept up my arms. Not fear, not yet. Just the kind of unease you get when something refuses to line up. I got back in the car and decided to leave. Not permanently, just to reset. I figured I'd drive out, grab a coffee somewhere, and come back once the sun was up. It felt like the responsible thing to do. I followed the signs for exit. The road narrowed. The trees closed in a little more. My headlights caught reflective markers along the edge of the gravel. I expected to see the booth again, the gate, the open barrier. Instead, the road curved, and straightened into a stretch that looked unfamiliar. Still gravel, still trees, still marked as part of the campground. I slowed down, checked the rearview mirror, nothing behind me. After another turn, the booth came into view. The same booth, the same yellow light, the same open window. I stopped the car without meaning to. For a second, I thought I had turned around without realizing it, that I had missed a sign, taken the wrong fork. But I hadn't. I was sure of that. The map behind the booth was there, but it wasn't mounted in the same spot. The board leaned slightly to the left now, as if someone had adjusted it. I didn't get out of the car this time. I sat there with my foot on the brake, engine idling, watching the light inside the booth hum softly. I remember thinking how easy it would be to just accept it, to pick a site, go to sleep, deal with it later. So that's what I did. I drove past the booth again, deeper into the campground. This time, I chose the first open site I saw. I parked, turned off the engine, and forced myself to breathe normally. I told myself I was overreacting, that places like this all looked the same at night. Still, I locked the car doors before I stepped outside. I stayed still for a while after locking the doors, long enough for the quiet to feel intentional. When I finally stepped out of the car, the air felt heavier than it had before. Not colder, just dense, like it didn't want to move unless I did. I kept my phone in my hand with the flashlight on. The beam cut a narrow tunnel through the dark. The trees outside it didn't feel closer, but they felt more aware, as if they were waiting for me to finish whatever I had come to do. I didn't bother setting up the tent. I told myself I'd rest in the car and leave as soon as it felt reasonable. After a few minutes, I got back in, closed the door, sat there listening again. That was when I noticed the radio. I hadn't turned it on, but the display glowed faintly, like it was waking up on its own. No music, no static, just the time. The same time as my dashboard clock, 10:47 p.m. I stared at it longer than I should have, waiting for the minute to change. It didn't. I picked up my phone. The battery had dropped more than it should have. I unplugged it, plugged it back in. The charging symbol flickered, then disappeared. I decided not to stay. I started the engine and followed the signs for exit again, slowly, deliberately. I counted the turns this time. 1, 2, a gentle curve to the right. The gravel road straightened. The headlights caught the reflective tape on the booth window. I felt my stomach tighten. The booth was there again. Same light, same open window, same empty chair. I didn't stop this time. I kept driving, passing it like it was just another site. I told myself that roads loop. Campgrounds are designed that way. Nothing about this meant I was trapped. The road narrowed further ahead. Trees pressed closer. Branches brushed the sides of the car with a dry, hollow sound. Then the road ended. Not abruptly, just softly. The gravel thinned out and turned to dirt. The headlights reached a wall of trees. No sign, no barrier, no indication that this wasn't the way out. I put the car in reverse and backed up carefully, turned around. followed the same path back. The booth came back into view. This time, something was different. The map behind it had changed. Not completely. The roads were still there. The loops still made sense, but the arrow pointing toward exit was gone. I sat there with the engine running, my foot pressed into the brake, staring at the board. That was when I realized something else. There were no sounds at all now. No gravel shifting, no wind, no insects. Even the engine felt muted, like it was running somewhere far away. I checked the time again, 10:47 p.m. I don't know how long I sat there after that. I only know that at some point, I stopped thinking about leaving. I just wanted the place to let me go. I shut off the engine. The silence pressed in immediately. Not like something rushing forward, more like something settling, as if the campground had been waiting for me to stop moving. I opened the door and stepped out. Gravel shifted under my shoe, but the sound felt wrong, too small, like it was being swallowed before it could finish echoing. I walked toward the booth. Up close, it looked older than it had from the car. The paint was chipped in places I didn't remember. The counter inside held the same clipboard, the same envelopes, the same metal box. But the light inside flickered now, not enough to go out, just enough to feel tired. I checked the camera mounted above the booth. I hadn't noticed it before. A small dome, black glass. It reflected my flashlight as I moved. When I shifted to the left, the reflection shifted too. I froze. The camera wasn't turning fast. It wasn't mechanical. It didn't whir or click. It simply followed, smoothly, quietly, like it already knew where I was going to be. I stepped back. The reflection stayed centered. I told myself it was motion tracking, that these places use cheap security systems, that it meant nothing. But I didn't wave. I didn't test it. I didn't want to confirm anything. I turned away from the booth and walked back toward my car. Halfway there, I stopped and looked around. That was when I noticed the absence. There were no insect sounds anymore, no rustle of leaves, no distant animals. The forest felt like a photograph, perfectly still, held in place. I checked my phone. The screen lit up slower than it should have. The battery indicator dropped 2% in the time it took me to unlock it. Still no signal. I took a photo of the map, then another, just in case. The images saved, but when I opened them, they looked darker than what I had seen with my eyes. The arrow that used to mark the exit didn't show up at all. I tried to record a short video. The camera app opened. The preview lagged behind my movements. When I lifted the phone, the screen caught up a second late. I stopped recording immediately. Back in the car, I checked the dashboard clock again. 10:47 p.m. I waited, counting my breaths, watching the second hand. It didn't move. I don't know when I accepted it. There wasn't a moment, no realization, just a quiet understanding that settled in my chest. The campground wasn't confused. It wasn't broken. It was working exactly the way it was supposed to. It let people in. I sat there with my hands resting on the steering wheel, not gripping it anymore. I didn't try to leave again. I just waited for whatever came next. I must have fallen asleep at some point. Not because I felt safe, just because my body stopped asking permission. When I opened my eyes, the light had changed. Pale, thin. Morning light, but weak, like it hadn't fully decided to be day yet. The engine was off. The radio was dark. The dashboard clock was blank. For a second, I thought the night had finally ended on its own. I stepped out of the car. The air moved again. Not much, but enough to feel real. A breeze passed through the trees, carrying the dry smell of dirt and pine. Somewhere far off, a bird made a single sound, then stopped. The booth was still there. At least, I thought it was. When I walked closer, I realized what I was looking at wasn't a booth at all anymore. Just a flat patch of ground where it should have been. Tire marks, faded footprints, nothing else. No light, no window, no map. The road leading out of the campground was clear, obvious even, wide enough to feel intentional, like it had always been there. I didn't hesitate this time. I got back in the car, started the engine, and drove forward. No turns, no loops, just a straight line out through the trees. When the gravel gave way to pavement, my shoulders finally dropped. I hadn't noticed how high they were before. A mile down the road, I pulled over. I needed to be sure. I checked my phone. The battery was low, but working. The photos I had taken were gone. No map, no booth, nothing from the night before. I opened a navigation app and searched for the campground by name. No results. I drove a little farther and glanced at the rearview mirror. Behind me, between the trees, I saw the sign. Brown, reflective, ordinary, the same one that had brought me in. I kept driving. I don't know how long it would have let me stay. I only know it never tried to stop me from coming in. We arrived earlier than planned. Late afternoon, enough light left to pretend the day wasn't already ending. The campground was busier than I expected. Not crowded, just occupied. A few tents here and there, a couple of RVs farther down the loop. The kind of place that makes you relax because you're not completely alone. We chose a site near the middle, not too close to the road, not too deep into the trees. By the time the tent was up, the sun had dropped behind the ridge. The air cooled fast, the kind of cold that sneaks in without warning. That was when someone walked into the edge of our light. He didn't come close. He stopped just outside the lantern's glow, hands loosely at his sides. "Evening," he said. His voice was calm, friendly, the kind you answer automatically. I said hello back. He nodded toward the tent, then the car. "Just checking everything's all right." I waited for him to say more, to introduce himself, to explain who he was. He didn't. He was older, maybe late 50s, early 60s. Baseball cap pulled low, jacket zipped all the way up even though it wasn't that cold yet. I glanced past him, expecting to see a Ranger truck, or at least a flashlight clipped to his belt. There was nothing. "No problem," I said. "We're all set." He smiled, not wide, just enough to be polite. "Good, quiet hours start at 10. "I know," I said. "We won't be loud." He stood there for another second, maybe two, then nodded again. "All right," he said, "just checking." He turned and walked back into the dark. No hurry, no flashlight, just the sound of his boots fading into the trees. I remember thinking how normal it all felt. A little awkward, maybe, but normal. People check on each other in places like this. That's what I told myself. I went back to what I was doing. Unrolled the sleeping bags, adjusted the lantern, tried to ignore the small part of my brain replaying his words. Just checking. When I zipped the tent closed later that night, I realized something I should have noticed sooner. I never saw him leave the campground. We tried to settle back into the evening, cooked a simple meal, kept our voices low, did everything the way you're supposed to when you don't want attention. For a while, it worked. The campground slipped into that late-night rhythm, zippers closing, a distant engine starting and then fading out, someone laughing once far away before going quiet again. I started to relax. That was when the lantern flickered. Just once, a brief dip in brightness, enough to make me look up, and that's when I saw him again. He was standing closer this time, still outside the light, but not by much. I hadn't heard him walk up. "Hey," he said softly, like he didn't want to startle us. My first instinct was embarrassment, like we'd done something wrong without realizing it. "Is everything okay?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah, just wanted to let you know your light's carrying a bit." I glanced at the lantern. It wasn't any brighter than before. "I can turn it down," I said. "That'd be good," he replied. "Some folks are trying to sleep." His tone was reasonable, apologetic even, the kind that makes you feel silly for questioning it. "Of course," I said. He didn't leave right away. He looked around the site, the car, the tent, the cooler by the table. His eyes moved slowly, like he was checking items off a list only he could see. After a few seconds, he smiled again. "Appreciated," he said. "Just checking." He stepped back into the darkness. I turned the lantern down, lower than necessary. We sat in silence after that. "I don't think he's a ranger," my partner said quietly. I shrugged. Maybe a volunteer or campground host. That explanation felt thin even as I said it, but it was better than the alternative. 10 minutes later, I zipped the tent closed. We lay there listening to the sounds outside. The fabric shifted with the breeze. Somewhere nearby, a branch cracked. Then the footsteps came back, slow, unhurried. They stopped just outside the tent. I held my breath. There was no voice this time, no greeting, just the sound of someone standing there, close enough that I could hear the faint scrape of his boot against the dirt. I waited for him to speak, for him to clear his throat, to say something polite. He didn't. After a long moment, the steps retreated. I didn't unzip the tent. I didn't look. I told myself the same thing again. He was just checking. I didn't sleep much after that, not because I was scared, because my mind wouldn't settle. Every small sound felt like it needed an explanation. The zipper of another tent, a cough somewhere down the loop, wind moving through branches that hadn't moved before. At some point, I realized I was listening for his footsteps. That bothered me more than anything else. Sometime after midnight, I heard them again, slow, measured, not trying to be quiet. They stopped at the edge of our site, just like before. I could tell by the way the gravel shifted, by how the sound didn't continue past us. My partner shifted beside me. "Is that him?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, and I hated how small my voice sounded. The footsteps moved closer, not into the light, not close enough to touch the tent, just close enough to be deliberate. Then his voice came through the fabric. "You folks doing all right in there?" Polite, calm, reasonable. I sat up. "Yes," I said. "Everything's fine." A pause. "I noticed your car door earlier," he said. "Thought it might not be fully shut." I knew that wasn't true. I remembered locking it, hearing the click. "It's closed," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "Good," he replied. "Wouldn't want anything happening overnight." I waited for him to leave. He didn't. The shadow of his boots stayed planted just outside the tent. I could see the shape through the fabric, two dark ovals where his feet were. I thought about unzipping the tent, about asking him directly who he was. I didn't do either, because that would have meant admitting something was wrong. And if nothing was wrong, then I would be the one making it strange. "I think we're good," I said again. "All right," he said, "just checking." The footsteps moved away, slowly, like he didn't want to rush the moment. I stayed awake long after that. When I finally drifted off, it was light enough outside to tell the difference between shadows and shapes. I woke up to the sound of voices, morning voices, casual, unconcerned. I unzipped the tent and stepped out. The campground looked normal again. Sunlight through the trees, people moving around, someone pouring coffee at a nearby site. I saw a ranger truck parked near the entrance. I walked over before I could change my mind. "Hey," I said to the ranger. "Quick question." He looked up, friendly, alert. "What's up? Do you have someone checking campsites at night?" I asked. "Like a volunteer or host?" He frowned slightly. "No," he said. "We don't do checks after quiet hours unless there's a complaint." I nodded, pretending that answered everything. "There was a guy," I said. "Older, baseball cap." The ranger shook his head. "No one fits that description." I thanked him and walked back to our site. As we packed up, I noticed something on the dirt near the tent. Boot prints, fresh, leading right up to where the man had been standing, and stopping there. They didn't lead away. We should have left right then, packed up, drove away, told ourselves it was nothing, and moved on. Instead, we stayed. Not because we felt safe, because everything looked safe again. Daylight does that. It smooths the edges, makes the night feel exaggerated, like something your mind invented because it was tired. We finished packing slowly, too slowly. I kept watching the trees at the edge of our site, half expecting him to step out again, to say something casual, to explain everything away. He didn't. The ranger truck drove off. The campground settled into its daytime routine. Kids riding bikes, someone laughing too loudly, a door slamming on an RV down the loop. Normal sounds, normal movement. We decided to stay one more night. Another bad decision made reasonable by the morning. That evening, we picked a different site, closer to other people, closer to the road. I told myself that mattered. Dark came faster the second night. We kept the lantern low, ate quietly, stayed inside the tent longer than usual. No footsteps, no voices. I almost started to believe it was over. Sometime after quiet hours, there was a knock. Not loud, not aggressive, just two gentle taps against the side of the tent. My heart dropped in a way it hadn't the night before. "Evening," his voice said, calm, familiar. I didn't answer. "I just wanted to check," he continued. "You moved sites. Thought I'd make sure everything was all right." My partner grabbed my arm, hard. "You don't need to," I said finally. "We're fine." A pause. "I know," he said. "That's why I'm here." The shadow of his boots appeared again at the bottom of the tent wall. Same place, same distance. I stared at it, trying to decide if this was the moment to unzip the tent, to force the situation into something clear and real. Instead, I stayed still. The boots shifted slightly, adjusting their stance. "You should keep the zipper closed tonight," he said. "Gets cold." Another pause. Then footsteps, slow, unhurried. They moved away, but not far. I could still feel them there, somewhere just outside the light. We left before sunrise. No discussion, no second guessing. We packed in silence, moving carefully, like noise itself might invite something back. The campground was still asleep, lanterns dark, tents zipped tight. A thin layer of fog hung low between the trees, blurring the edges of everything. Nothing followed us to the car. I started the engine and pulled out without looking back at the site. Gravel crunched under the tires. The sound felt too loud in the quiet morning. As we drove toward the exit, I felt the tension in my chest begin to ease. Slowly, reluctantly. The road curved, then straightened. The exit sign came into view. I didn't slow down. We passed through the gate and onto the paved road beyond. The campground disappeared behind us, swallowed by trees and fog. A few miles later, we stopped at a gas station. Bright lights, other people, normal conversations happening all at once. That was when I realized my hands were shaking. While my partner went inside, I checked my phone. Messages loaded. Notifications came through. Everything worked the way it was supposed to. I told myself it was over. That night, we stayed at a small roadside motel, locked the door, pulled the curtains closed, left the lights on longer than necessary. Sometime after midnight, there was a knock. Not loud, not aggressive. Two gentle taps. I sat up in bed immediately. "Front desk," a man's voice said. Calm, familiar. I didn't move. Another pause. "I just wanted to check," he continued. "Make sure everything's all right." I stayed still until the silence came back. In the morning, there was no record of anyone stopping by our room. No cameras showing the hallway. No staff who remembered knocking. We didn't talk about it after that. But even now, when someone checks on us without a reason, I feel my chest tighten. Because some people don't check to help. They check to see if you're still there. I wasn't planning to stop there. The RV park was supposed to be a backup. One of those places you circle on the map and hope you never need. But the light was fading faster than I expected. The road narrowed. The radio cut in and out. And by the time the sign appeared, I was already tired of making decisions. The park sat just inside the tree line. Gravel entrance, a small bulletin board, a metal pay station with a slot for envelopes. It looked maintained, not busy, not abandoned. I pulled into an empty site near the edge and shut off the engine. The silence felt clean, temporary, like it would pass once I settled in. I turned on the interior lights and started getting ready for the night. That was when the radio crackled. Not music, not static. A calm male voice, professional, familiar. Activity reported in the area. Use caution. No location, no details. I turned the volume up, waiting for more. The signal dropped instead. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the RV door. 2 firm taps. Not urgent, not casual. I opened it part way. A ranger stood just outside the step, uniform neat, hat low. Flashlight clipped to his belt, turned off. He didn't shine it at me, didn't step closer. "Evening," he said. "You planning to stay the night?" "Yes," I said, "just passing through." He nodded, like that answered something important. "There's been some activity around here," he said, same word as the radio. "Nothing serious, but it's better if you stay put tonight." The way he said it mattered, not a warning, not a request, just information. "Is something closed?" I asked. "A road or—" "No," he said, "just protocol." He didn't ask for my ID, didn't look inside the RV, didn't write anything down. I waited for him to explain what kind of activity he meant. He didn't. "Morning will be fine," he added. "You can head out then." He stepped back, giving me space. "All right," I said. He smiled briefly. Professional, reassuring. "Good," he said. "It's safer that way." He turned and walked off between the trees. No flashlight, no radio call, just the sound of boots on gravel fading into the dark. I closed the door and locked it. I remember thinking how strange it was that he hadn't told me to lock up, hadn't told me to keep the lights off, hadn't told me anything except not to leave. I shut off the radio and sat there for a long moment, listening. Outside, the forest stayed quiet. Inside, the words kept repeating. "Stay put." I tried to treat it like a normal night. Finished setting up, checked the locks, put water on the counter where I could reach it. I told myself the ranger wouldn't have said anything if it wasn't routine. That was the whole point of routines. They're meant to calm you down. Still, I kept the interior lights lower than usual. Outside, the RV park settled in. A door closing somewhere down the loop. An engine starting and pulling away. The sound faded quicker than it should have. I noticed the absence before anything else. No insects, no wind through the trees. Just quiet. I turned the radio back on, keeping the volume low. Static. Then a brief burst of voices, too distorted to understand. I waited for the ranger's voice to come back. It didn't. An hour passed, maybe more. I checked the mirrors. Nothing moved between the trees. No headlights, no flashlights, no footsteps on gravel. That should have been reassuring. It wasn't. I thought about leaving anyway, just pulling out quietly and driving until the signal came back. I put my hand on the ignition. That was when the radio clicked on by itself. "Remain where you are," a voice said, flat, neutral, not rushed. I froze. The message cut off before I could hear anything else. I waited for the ranger to come back, for him to knock again and explain what that was supposed to mean. He didn't. Instead, I heard movement outside. Not fast, not sneaking. Someone walking the length of the RV. Gravel shifting under slow, deliberate steps. I held my breath and listened. The steps stopped near the rear, then started again, like someone checking the space, making sure I was still there. I didn't open the door. I didn't speak. After a long moment, the steps moved away. I sat there in the dark, staring at the windshield, replaying the ranger's words. "It's safer that way." I realized then that he hadn't told me why it was safer, only that leaving wasn't. And that felt like a difference that mattered. I stayed awake longer than I meant to, not out of fear, out of calculation. Every option felt wrong. Leaving felt like disobedience. Staying felt like cooperation. I didn't like either of those feelings sitting in my chest. Sometime after midnight, headlights appeared at the far end of the loop. They moved slowly, too slowly to be passing through. I watched them in the side mirror as they crept along the road, stopping briefly at empty sites. The lights never turned toward my RV. They didn't need to. The radio crackled again. "Remain in your vehicle." The same words, same flat tone. This time, I turned the volume up. No station ID, no weather band, no follow-up. Just silence after the message ended. I reached for my phone. No signal. Not even the faint kind that lets a message try and fail. I decided to leave anyway. I turned the key. The engine started without hesitation. The dashboard lit up, bright and ordinary. For a moment, I felt stupid for waiting this long. I shifted into drive. That was when the headlights outside went dark, all at once, as if they'd been switched off intentionally. I paused, my foot still on the brake. The radio clicked on again. "Good," the voice said. Not through static, not distorted. Clear, close. I shut the engine off. I don't remember deciding to do it. My hand just moved. A few seconds later, there was a knock on the RV door. The same 2 firm taps as before. I didn't open it. "Everything all right in there?" the ranger asked. His voice sounded the same as earlier, calm, familiar, reasonable. "Yes," I said. "I was just heading out." A pause. "That wouldn't be a good idea," he replied. "Why?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "Because you're safer where you are," he said. I looked through the peephole. He stood just outside the step, same uniform, same hat pulled low, but his flashlight was missing now. So was the radio on his shoulder. "How long do I need to stay?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. "Until it's clear," he said finally. "Clear of what?" He smiled. The knock didn't come again. He just turned and walked back into the dark, leaving the words hanging in the air. I sat there with the engine off, the keys still in my hand. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. The instructions weren't meant to keep me safe. They were meant to keep me still. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the driver's seat with the keys resting in my palm, feeling their weight like a decision I wasn't allowed to make. The park stayed dark, no more headlights, no footsteps on gravel. That should have meant something had passed. It didn't feel that way. Sometime later, the radio came on again by itself. Not loud, not urgent, just enough to make sure I heard it. Status unchanged. No explanation, no context. I tried the door, still locked. I tried the windows, still sealed. Everything about the RV felt suddenly smaller, tighter, like it had been designed to keep me contained instead of protected. I told myself to wait for morning. That morning would reset everything. The knock came again before I could finish that thought. 2 taps, then another 2, spaced carefully, like punctuation. I looked through the peephole. The ranger stood closer this time, close enough that I could see the stitching on his uniform. The badge caught a sliver of moonlight, but the name beneath it was unreadable, either scratched away or worn smooth. "You did the right thing," he said through the door. "I stayed," I replied. He nodded, as if that mattered more than anything else. "It won't be much longer," he said. I felt my throat tighten. "Until what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned closer to the door, not touching it, just close enough that I could hear his breathing. Slow, even. "People who leave early cause problems," he said. "They don't always come back the same." I stared at the badge again, trying to force the letters to make sense. "Am I being detained?" I asked. That made him smile. "No," he said. "You're being advised." The radio clicked on behind me. Remain. One word. Clear. Final. The ranger straightened up and stepped back into the darkness. This time, I heard his footsteps circle the RV. Once. Twice. Then they stopped. I realized then that he wasn't guarding the door. He was waiting to see if I would try it. Morning came without ceremony. No sunrise I could remember seeing, just a gradual thinning of the dark. The radio was silent. The windshield was clear. I checked the clock. 6:18 a.m. For the first time since arriving, the world felt like it was moving forward again. I didn't wait. I started the engine and drove. No knock, no voice telling me to stay, no headlights cutting me off. The road out of the park looked ordinary in daylight, gravel turning to pavement, trees giving way to open sky, the kind of exit you don't question when it finally appears. A few miles down, I found the ranger station, lights on, flag out front, a truck parked beside the building. I went inside and told the man at the desk what had happened, about the warning, the radio messages, the ranger who told me to stay. He listened without interrupting. Then he checked the log. No one was assigned to night patrol, he said. Not last night. I described the uniform, the badge, the way he spoke. The man shook his head. That's not one of ours. He offered to take a report. I declined. I didn't want a paper trail. I just wanted distance. I drove for hours after that. Didn't stop until the park was well behind me. That night, I slept in a rest area with the engine off and the radio unplugged. At some point, I woke to silence again. The same thick, waiting quiet. I didn't move. I didn't check the door. I just listened. There was no knock, no voice, only the sense that something was still paying attention, still waiting to see if I would listen the next time someone told me it was safer to stay. I don't. I arrived at the campground later than planned. Not late enough to be concerning, just late enough that the light felt thinner, stretched out. Most of the sites were already claimed, tents pitched, a few RVs settling in for the night. It was the kind of place that made you feel watched in a comforting way. Other people nearby, minding their own business. I chose a site near the center loop. Flat ground, fire ring, picnic table facing another campsite directly across the narrow road. That was the first thing I noticed about it, the angle. When I finished setting up my tent, I looked up and saw the light, a single warm yellow glow coming from the campsite across from mine. Not bright, not harsh, just steady. They had a tent up too, similar size, neutral color, nothing unusual, but I didn't see anyone moving around it. I assumed they were inside, or nearby, or just out of view. I went back to my setup. As the sun dropped behind the trees, the campground shifted into its quieter mode. Voices lowered, footsteps slowed, zippers closed. Someone laughed once, far away, then stopped. Quiet hours started at 10. By then, most of the lights around the loop had gone out. Lanterns dimmed. Headlamps clicked off one by one. The light across from me didn't change. Same brightness, same color, same position. I sat at the picnic table and watched it longer than I meant to, waiting for it to flicker, or move, or for someone to pass in front of it. Nothing did. Eventually, I told myself it wasn't my business. Some people sleep with the light on. Some people are afraid of the dark. I zipped my tent closed and lay down, facing the thin fabric wall between me and the road. Through it, I could still see the glow, muted now, diffused, but constant. That was when it occurred to me. I had been there for over an hour, and I still hadn't seen anyone move in that campsite. I tried to stop paying attention to it. That was the easiest way to deal with the feeling creeping up on me. I focused on my own routine instead. Cleaned up the campsite, put food away, double-checked the cooler latch even though I knew nothing would touch it. Every few minutes, my eyes drifted back across the road. The light hadn't changed. Not dimmer, not brighter. Not even a flicker when the wind picked up and moved through the trees. I listened for sounds, voices, footsteps, the soft shuffle of someone settling into a sleeping bag. There was nothing. Around me, the campground felt alive in small, ordinary ways. Someone coughed 2 sites down. A zipper rasped open and closed. An RV engine hummed briefly before shutting off. Across from me, there was only the light. I told myself they were inside the tent, maybe reading, maybe scrolling on a phone, maybe just sitting there, lost in thought. That explanation worked for a while. Then the wind came. It wasn't strong, just enough to make the trees sway and the nylon walls of my tent ripple softly. I watched the campsite across from mine. Their tent didn't move. The fabric stayed perfectly still. The light inside didn't tremble or shift the way mine did. That was when I felt the first real spike of unease. Sharp, sudden. I stood up and stepped closer to the road, keeping my movements casual. I didn't want to look like I was watching. From that angle, I could see more of their setup. There was no cooler, no chairs, no bag hanging from the table, just the tent and the light. I turned away before my thoughts could go any further. It felt rude to stare, like crossing an invisible line. I went back inside my tent and zipped it closed. The glow from across the road pressed faintly against the fabric, like a reminder I couldn't shut out. As I lay there, listening to the campground settle even deeper into silence, one thought kept returning. Whatever was across from me didn't need to move. It just needed to stay lit. I woke up because my tent went quiet. Not silent. Quiet in a way that felt intentional. Like the sounds had been lowered instead of stopping naturally. I checked my watch. 2:37 a.m. The wind was gone. The trees stood still. I turned onto my side and looked through the thin fabric toward the road. The light was still there. Same color, same height, same distance from the ground. I waited for my eyes to adjust, expecting to finally see movement. A shadow passing in front of the glow, the outline of someone sitting up. Nothing crossed it. I sat up slowly, trying not to make noise. My own tent shifted when I moved. Nylon whispering. Stakes creaking faintly. Across from me, there was no response. I unzipped the tent just enough to see out. The campground was asleep. Every other site was dark. Only that one remained lit. I watched it for a long time. Long enough that my neck began to ache. Long enough that I stopped counting minutes. At some point, I noticed something I hadn't before. The light wasn't inside the tent. It was slightly in front of it, suspended, hanging from a branch that extended over the site, just high enough to shine directly into the tent opening. I felt a tightness in my chest then. Not panic, not fear, recognition. Someone had positioned it that way on purpose. I closed the zipper slowly and sat there in the dark, my back against the tent wall. I told myself I wouldn't look again, that acknowledging it would make it worse. But curiosity won. When I checked a second time, the light was closer. Not by much, just enough to change the angle of the glow against the ground. The branch it hung from was the same. The distance between us wasn't. I realized then that I hadn't heard anything move. No footsteps, no rustle of leaves, no scrape of metal against bark. The light had shifted without a sound. I stopped trying to explain it. Whatever was across from me wasn't trying to hide. It was adjusting, and it knew I was awake. I should have left then, packed up quietly, walked to the car, drove until the light was just another memory. Instead, I stayed where I was. Not because I felt brave, because I didn't want to make noise. I waited, sitting upright in my tent, listening for anything that would explain what I'd seen. A branch creaking, a zipper, the faint shuffle of someone adjusting their footing. Nothing came. Minutes passed, then more. The light stayed exactly where it was, angled toward my tent opening. Close enough now that it painted the road between us a pale, uneven yellow. I told myself it was a prank, someone messing with me from another site. That explanation fell apart the moment I stood up. As soon as I shifted my weight, the glow moved again. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just enough to keep its focus. I froze. The light stopped moving. We stayed like that for a long moment, me standing inside my tent, the light fixed on the spot where I was. I slowly sat back down. The glow eased away, returning to its previous angle. That was when the full weight of it hit me. It wasn't lighting the campsite. It was tracking me. My throat went dry. I reached for my phone, more out of instinct than hope. No signal. The screen felt too bright in my hand, too exposed. I turned it off and sat there in the dark, trying to keep my breathing steady. Across the road, the light remained patient. I thought about calling out, about asking if anyone was there. I didn't do it. because whatever had set that light wasn't waiting for permission, and it wasn't lost. It already knew exactly where I was. I left before the sky began to change, before the light could pretend it belonged there. I moved slowly, carefully. Every sound felt louder than it should have. Zippers, fabric, the soft click of the car door unlocking. The light stayed fixed on my tent the entire time. It didn't follow me to the car. It didn't need to. When I started the engine, the glow across the road finally shifted, not toward me, away. It swung back toward the empty campsite, settling into its original position, as if its job was done. I pulled out without looking again, drove until the trees thinned and the road widened. Didn't stop until the sun was fully up and the world felt real again. Later that morning, I thought about reporting it, about mentioning the light to a ranger, asking if someone had been camping across from me. I didn't. I knew what the answer would be. A few weeks later, I camped again. Different state, different campground, different loop. I chose a site at the edge this time. No one directly across from me. That night, I lay awake longer than usual, listening. Around midnight, a warm yellow glow appeared through the trees. Not across from me, off to the side, just enough to be seen. I never looked directly at it. I packed up at dawn and left. I don't camp where my site faces another one anymore, and I never assume a light is there to help someone see. Sometimes, it's there to make sure you can be seen. We got to the campground earlier than we planned, late afternoon. That quiet stretch of time where nothing feels urgent yet. The place looked normal, a loop road cutting through the trees, campsites laid out evenly, picnic tables facing fire rings that hadn't been used in hours. Right at the entrance stood a large wooden rule board, clean, maintained, recently repainted. I stopped to read it. No fires after 10 p.m. Food must be secured. Quiet hours strictly enforced. Then the last rule. It was written in a thinner font than the others. The paint slightly faded, like it had been there longer. Remain inside your tent after dark. No explanation, no warning symbol, no mention of wildlife. Below it, I noticed faint scrape marks, old lettering that had been sanded down and rewritten more than once. I assumed it was about animals, bears, coyotes, something practical. Everyone else seemed to accept it without question. Cars continued to arrive. People unloaded gear, laughing, talking, moving freely while there was still light. No one stopped at the board longer than a glance. No one pointed at the rule. No one asked a ranger about it. We picked a site near the center of the campground, close enough to others to feel normal, far enough not to feel crowded. As the sun lowered, something subtle changed. People didn't linger outside. Lanterns came on briefly, then dimmed. Conversations ended earlier than usual. It wasn't sudden, it felt rehearsed. By the time darkness settled in, no one was walking the loop. No kids running. No doors opening and closing. I noticed something else then. There were plenty of cars parked, but no voices, no movement. No ranger made a round. No announcement came over a speaker. No one enforced the rule. They didn't need to. When I finally zipped the tent closed, the campground felt less like a place people were sleeping and more like a place that had already been cleared. Lying there in the quiet, one thought wouldn't leave me. That rule wasn't written to keep people safe. It was written to make sure they stayed put. For a while, nothing felt wrong. We finished setting up while there was still light, cooked a simple meal, cleaned up early, faster than we usually would. It felt like everyone was doing the same thing. Across the loop, a family with 2 kids packed their table in silence. No music, no arguing, just efficient movements like they'd done it before. A couple in an RV pulled their shades down before the sun fully disappeared. No one said anything. No one needed to. As darkness crept in, the campground didn't shut down. It folded in on itself. Lanterns came on briefly, then dimmed. Headlamps flicked off. Zippers closed, one by one, in a slow, almost polite rhythm. I checked my watch, 9:47 p.m. Quiet hours didn't start for another 13 minutes, but it didn't matter. The rule wasn't about noise. I stepped just outside the tent to toss a trash bag into the bin near our site. From every direction, I felt eyes on me. Not openly, not obviously, just the sense that I was the only one still moving. No one said a word. No one unzipped a tent to look. I dropped the bag and went back inside, suddenly aware of how loud my footsteps sounded. Inside the tent, the air felt warmer, smaller, like being indoors rather than outside. Through the thin fabric, I could hear things I hadn't noticed before. Soft shifting, fabric tightening, someone coughing once, then stopping. At the edge of the loop, a car pulled in late. Headlights swept across the trees. The engine shut off. A door opened. Someone laughed. The sound cut off abruptly. I waited for more, for voices, for questions. Nothing came. No one went to the rule board. No ranger appeared. No one explained the silence. A few minutes later, I heard the zipper from that site open, then close. That was it. I lay back, staring at the dark ceiling of the tent, listening to the campground hold its breath. Everyone knew what to do. No one needed to be told twice. Part 3. Unease. The rules said to stay inside after dark. The sound started after full dark. Not loud, not sudden. Just enough to make it impossible to fall asleep. Footsteps moved along the gravel path between sites. Slow, unhurried. Metal clicked against metal somewhere near the bathrooms. A zipper rasped open, then closed again. None of it sounded panicked. That was what bothered me. I lay still, counting the seconds between each noise, trying to place them on the map of the campground in my head. Every sound felt intentional, like it belonged exactly where it was. From the site next to ours, I heard a whisper, a man's voice, low, controlled. It's probably fine. I waited for someone to answer him. A partner, a child, anyone. No one did. The whisper came again, quieter this time, like he was convincing himself. We'll just stay inside. Something shifted outside his tent. Then nothing. I realized I was gripping the edge of my sleeping bag hard enough to make my fingers ache. Another sound followed. Not close, not far. A soft, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across dirt. It moved slowly, stopping and starting, never rushing. I wanted to look. I wanted to unzip the tent and see what was happening. But the rule came back to me immediately. Clear, simple, absolute. Remain inside your tent after dark. I stayed still. The dragging sound passed our site and continued down the loop. Wherever it went, it didn't come back. Time stretched. Minutes lost their shape. Eventually, the campground settled into a deeper silence, the kind that feels earned, not empty. I exhaled slowly, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Nothing had happened. At least, nothing I could prove. And that was the worst part. Whatever was moving out there didn't need people to break the rule. It relied on them following it. Part 4. Escalation. The rules said to stay inside after dark. I shifted in my sleeping bag. Just a little. Enough to ease the pressure in my shoulder. Immediately, something outside stopped moving. Not close enough to touch, not far enough to ignore. The silence that followed felt deliberate, like a response. I froze, replaying the motion in my head, wondering if I'd imagined the timing. A few seconds passed. Nothing happened. I moved again, slower this time. The sound returned. One step, then another. Measured, controlled. It wasn't walking past the tent. It was adjusting to me. I stayed still. The sound stopped. That was when I understood. Movement mattered. I waited until my breathing slowed, until my body felt heavy and unimportant. Only then did the presence outside shift away, gravel crunching softly as it retreated down the loop. Hours passed like that, measuring every breath, every swallow, every accidental movement. At some point, I realized there was light outside the tent. Not bright, not enough to illuminate anything clearly, just a faint, steady glow. I carefully turned my head toward the tent wall and pressed my ear against the fabric. The light didn't flicker. It didn't sweep like a flashlight. It stayed fixed. Against my better judgment, I reached for my phone and turned the screen on, shielding it under the blanket. The time read 2:18 a.m. I thought about the rule board, about the faded paint, the scratched away lines. I needed to see it again. Slowly, carefully, I unzipped the tent just enough to peek out. The campground was barely visible, washed in pale moonlight. The rule board stood at the entrance, just visible through the trees. Something was different. A new line of text sat beneath the others, written in the same thin font. Movement attracts attention. My stomach dropped. I hadn't seen that rule before. I zipped the tent shut and didn't move again. The light outside stayed where it was until the sky began to pale. Part 5, Point of No Return. The rules said to stay inside after dark. Morning didn't arrive the way it usually does. There was no gradual warming of the air, no birds, no early footsteps, just light. I stayed still long after the sky turned pale, afraid that whatever had been watching at night hadn't finished yet. When I finally unzipped the tent, the campground looked wrong, empty. Every site around us was cleared. No tents, no coolers, no chairs. Only flattened dirt where they had been. Cars were gone too, dozens of them, vanished without tracks or tire marks. The family that arrived late the night before was gone. Their site looked untouched, like no one had ever been there. I walked toward the entrance, my movements cautious out of habit. The rule board stood where it always had. The wood looked newer than I remembered. The rules were still there, all of them. And at the bottom, in the same thin font, a new line had been added. Thank you for complying. And nothing else. No explanation, no instructions. I stood there for a long time, waiting for someone to arrive. A ranger, another camper, anyone who could tell me what had happened. No one did. Eventually, I returned to the tent and packed up. My hands shook the entire time. As I drove out, I noticed something on the ground near the exit. A folded sheet of paper. White. Clean. I picked it up. Printed in the same font as the rules, it read, "You followed instructions. You may leave." I didn't stop driving after that. I don't camp where rules change overnight anymore. And I don't trust places that thank you for doing exactly what you're told. Because whatever was out there didn't want obedience. It wanted proof. Aftermath. The rules said to stay inside after dark. I didn't tell anyone what happened. Not at first. I told people the campground was closed unexpectedly, that plans changed, that we decided to leave early. Those explanations worked. They always do. Weeks later, I searched for the campground online. I wanted to see if anyone else had mentioned the rules. The silence. The way everyone disappeared. The website still existed. Photos of smiling families. Reviews from months ago. No mention of the rule board. No mention of staying inside after dark. I checked the location on a map. Zoomed in, zoomed out. The campground didn't show as permanently closed. It didn't show as active either. It was just there. I camped again later that year. Different state, different park. The rules were normal, predictable, comforting even. Still, that night I stayed inside my tent longer than I needed to, listened harder than I used to. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside, just one set, passing through. I didn't move. In the morning, everything was still there. People, cars, voices. But when I packed up, I noticed something tucked into the side pocket of my backpack. A small white card, thin paper, clean edges. Printed in a familiar thin font, it read, "Thank you for your continued cooperation." I threw it away, burned it, left it behind at a gas station trash can miles from the park. But sometimes, when I see rule boards at trailheads or campgrounds, I catch myself scanning for one last line. Not because I plan to follow it, but because I want to know whether I've already been counted. As the afternoon stretched on, the campground grew quieter in a way that felt earned. Not eerie, just calm. I sat at the picnic table, watching other campers go about their routines, packing chairs, wiping down tables, folding tarps. No one rushed, no one argued. They moved with the kind of certainty that comes from knowing exactly what you're about to do next. A couple in their 30s packed up the site across from mine. They worked efficiently, barely speaking. When everything was loaded, they stood for a moment, looking around like they were double-checking something invisible. I nodded at them as they passed. "Heading out early?" I asked. The woman smiled politely. "We don't stay after dark." That was all she said. Not can't, not shouldn't, don't. Their car disappeared down the road. The gates stayed open. By early evening, half the sites were empty. By sunset, most of them were. I walked the loop once, just to stretch my legs. Trash bins were empty. Fire rings cold. Restrooms unlocked but unused. It felt like the campground had already moved on without me. Back at my site, I cooked dinner in the fading light. The sounds carried farther now. Every scrape of metal, every crackle of the stove. No one else was making noise. A final vehicle rolled past just as the sky turned orange. An older pickup, bed full of camping gear. The driver raised a hand as he passed, like a small apology. I watched his taillights vanish, listened to the engine fade. The quiet that followed was different from before, not peaceful, final. I checked my phone. Still had signal, still had time. I told myself the Ranger would have been clearer if staying was a problem. The gate was open, the rules were vague. Nothing told me I had to leave, so I stayed. At the time, it felt reasonable, like any other camping night. I didn't yet understand that everyone else had already treated sunset like a deadline, and I was the only one who missed it. I arrived at the campground earlier than planned. Mid-afternoon, plenty of daylight, enough time to relax without feeling rushed. The Ranger booth was open when I checked in. A middle-aged man in a faded uniform handed me the permit and pointed toward the loop. As I turned to leave, he added something casually, like small talk. Most people leave before dark here. He didn't smile when he said it, but he didn't sound serious either. I nodded, assuming he meant it got quiet at night. Places like this usually do. The campground itself looked ordinary, a wide gravel road. Sites spaced far enough apart to feel private, but not isolated. A few RVs, mostly tents. Near the entrance stood a large information board. Maps, fire restrictions, wildlife notices. I skimmed it quickly. Checkout time, quiet hours, emergency numbers. Near the bottom, one line caught my attention. Gate access limited after sunset. That was all. No time listed, no explanation. The gate was still wide open. Cars passed through without slowing. I picked a site near the middle of the loop, close enough to others to feel normal, far enough to be quiet. By late afternoon, a steady trickle of vehicles began leaving. Campers packed up earlier than I expected. Coolers loaded, awnings folded. I told myself they were just day users, hikers heading home, people with long drives ahead. Around sunset, I noticed something else. No new cars arrived, not one. As the light thinned and the trees darkened, the campground felt like it was preparing for something, not closing, not shutting down, just emptying. I watched the last RV roll past my site and disappear down the road. The gate remained open. I stayed. At the time, it didn't feel like a decision, just a delay. I didn't realize yet that staying past a certain point wasn't the same as choosing to stay. It was missing something you were supposed to do. Full dark settled in without ceremony. No sudden drop in temperature, no wind, just the quiet clicking into place. I sat outside longer than I should have, listening. The campground sounded bigger now, like the space between things had stretched. Somewhere far off, a car engine started. It idled for a few seconds, then shut off. I waited for headlights. They never came. I checked my phone again. The signal bar flickered, then steadied. No new messages, no missed calls. I walked toward the entrance, stopping just short of the gate. It was still open, wide enough for 2 cars to pass. The road beyond it disappeared into darkness like any other forest road. Nothing blocked the exit. Still, I didn't leave. When I turned back, I noticed the lights. Small amber markers along the loop road. They hadn't been on earlier. They didn't illuminate anything useful. They just marked where the road curved, where it narrowed, where it turned back on itself. I realized then that the campground was easier to navigate at night than during the day. The paths were clearer, more defined. Back at my site, I climbed into the tent and zipped it closed. The zipper sounded too loud. I froze halfway, then finished it slowly. Minutes passed, then more. From somewhere near the restrooms, I heard footsteps. Not hurried, not cautious. They moved with purpose. I listened for voices, for keys, for doors. None came. The footsteps crossed the gravel, paused, then continued down the loop. They never approached my site. They didn't need to. A new sound followed, metal on metal. A gate hinge, maybe. I sat up, heart racing, and checked the time. 9:02 p.m., earlier than I expected. I tried the car key fob from inside the tent. No response, no beep, no flash of lights. The gate might still be open, but something else had started to close. I lay back down, staring into the dark, realizing that the night hadn't trapped me. It had just begun to reorganize itself around the people who stayed. I decided to leave, not because anything had chased me, not because I'd seen something I couldn't explain, just a quiet certainty that staying any longer would make the choice for me. I grabbed my keys and stepped out of the tent. The amber lights along the loop road were brighter now. Not brighter in strength, but clearer, like my eyes had adjusted to them. They traced a gentle path toward the entrance, guiding more than illuminating. The gate was still open. I could see it between the trees. Relief came too easily. I loaded the last of my gear in silence, closed the trunk, and slid into the driver's seat. The engine started on the first try. The dashboard clock blinked, then settled. 12:41 a.m. That didn't feel right. I checked my phone. 12:07 a.m. I put the car in drive anyway. The road toward the gate felt longer than it had earlier. The curves softer. The distance stretched just enough to be noticeable. When I reached the gate, I slowed. The hinges were visible, the latch untouched. I drove through. The trees on the other side looked the same. Same darkness, same narrow road. But the amber lights were still there, ahead of me, spacing out the road like markers. I drove for several minutes before I realized something was wrong. The campground sign appeared again on my right. Same wooden post, same faded lettering. I hadn't turned around. I stopped the car this time. The engine ticked as it cooled. The silence pressed in. I was still allowed to leave. Nothing blocked the road. Nothing chased me back. I just wasn't getting farther away. That was when it hit me. I hadn't stayed too long by accident. I'd stayed past the point where leaving meant something. And now the campground was just keeping me where I belonged. I sat in the car longer than I meant to, the engine off, the keys resting in my hand. Nothing was stopping me from trying again. That was the problem. I drove through the gate a second time, slower, watching the road more carefully. The amber lights guided me forward, spaced evenly, patient. The forest on either side looked unchanged, but it felt thinner somehow, like a backdrop instead of a place. After a few minutes, the sign appeared again. Same post, same scratches, same shadow leaning across the lettering. I laughed under my breath, sharp and humorless. I hadn't gone in a circle. I'd gone nowhere. I checked the mirrors. The road behind me was already darker than it should have been, the amber lights fading one by one. I turned the car around. Back inside the campground, everything looked slightly abandoned now. Not empty, neglected. The ranger booth lights were off. The door stood ajar. I stepped out of the car and walked inside. Dust coated the counter. A paper calendar hung on the wall, frozen on yesterday's date. No notes, no explanation. Outside, the amber lights dimmed further, like they were no longer needed. That was when I understood. Leaving wasn't something you could do whenever you felt like it. It was something you were supposed to do, and I hadn't. I slept in the car that night, not because I wanted to, because there was nowhere else that felt connected to anything real. When the sky finally lightened, it didn't feel like morning. It felt like a reset that hadn't included me. I made it out sometime after sunrise. I can't say how. One moment I was driving the same empty road, the amber lights gone, the forest finally looking solid again. The next, I was merging onto a highway with actual traffic, people, noise, normal distance between things. My phone buzzed all at once. Missed calls, messages, a voicemail from the night before. "You never showed up," it said. "We thought you'd already left." At a gas station miles away, I checked the receipt. The date was the next day. I told myself it was exhaustion, a bad night, a place that messed with my sense of time. But when I looked up the campground later, I couldn't find it. Not under the name on the sign, not under the park system. The road existed, the forest existed, the campground didn't. A few weeks later, I camped again. I left before sunset, packed early, didn't wait for darkness to decide for me. I don't stay late anymore, not anywhere, because now I know something most places won't tell you. Some exits don't close. They just stop meaning anything after the moment you were supposed to take them. If you're still listening, it means you didn't leave early either. These places never stopped anyone. They didn't close the gates. They didn't give warnings. They just waited for people to decide. Most campers knew when to go. They packed up. They left while the road still led somewhere. The ones who stayed thought they had more time, thought one more night wouldn't matter. Sometimes, that's all it takes. The next stories are worse, different places, same mistake. Because the scariest campgrounds aren't the ones that trap you, they're the ones that let you stay.